This is an open letter to Blizzard. I know that an open letter to Blizzard is generally a harebrained idea. They can't listen to every communication they get. But then again, A, Blizzard is making so many changes this expansion that they're paying attention to feedback now more than ever, and B, everyone thinks that an open letter would be a harebrained idea, so few of them are trying it. And the fact that few of them are trying it means maybe Blizzard can listen to this one? It's crazy enough to work. For legal reasons, I'll be posting a transcript of this in the World of Warcraft forums. It's my understanding that a company accepting ideas from open letters is kind of dodgy from a legal standpoint, and that posting the ideas in your forum gives you legal protection as far as that goes. With that out of the way, I'll start by saying I've played since vanilla, and I can tell there are people on your team who have also been with World of Warcraft as a project for that long. Abilities and concepts are resurfacing that haven't been seen since vanilla. Raptor Strike, Mongoose Bite, Divine Intervention, and the version of Divine Favor I'm seeing in the Paladin PvP talent grid all came from vanilla. But given everything that's happened since vanilla, all the lessons that Blizzard has learned throughout the last 5 expansions, all the course corrections that each class in the overall game has had, I have to say I'm a little surprised at some of the decisions that I'm seeing. Now, I like how class identity is the big push for this expansion, and while I initially liked the overall concept of Holy Paladins being close to the targets they heal, there's an inherent problem in this. Walk with me down memory lane for a minute here. Who remembers Spiritual Attunement? Spiritual Attunement was a passive that you gave to all paladins when the Burning Crusade came out. One of the things that prevented protection paladins from tanking effectively in vanilla was a lack of tools. I'll come back to that concept later, and one of the tools protection paladins lacked before the Burning Crusade was a tool for replenishing their mana. Your solution to this at the time was innovative and worked perfectly. Give all paladins a passive ability at level 8 that grants paladins mana whenever they get healed by someone else equal to 8% of the healing. This wasn't a protection-specific passive because, at the time, the only way to make a protection-specific passive was to put it deep in the protection tree, and you couldn't do that because you wanted low-level paladins to be able to tank. So it had to be a passive for all specs. This was ingenious in the Burning Crusade, but it had problems in Wrath of the Lich King, which was when you first got serious about making Retribution a PvE DPS spec. Remember when it was specifically a PvP spec? But I digress. Since all 3 specs had this passive where they got mana when someone else healed them, raid encounters where the raid needed a lot of healing meant Holy and Retribution Paladins would be drowning in mana in those fights, but they'd be starved for mana in other fights where only the tank takes damage. That got difficult for you guys to balance, so you ended up turning Spiritual Attunement into a deep protection talent partway through Wrath of the Lich King, and eventually you took it out of the game altogether to replace it with the protection-specific passive mana replenishment that we know today. The lesson to be learned from Spiritual Attunement is, I know what you're thinking, and it's that spec-specific passives and abilities are awesome for a design standpoint. I won't contest that, but the lesson I'm trying to point out is that, in the long run, it causes more problems than it solves to have a spec whose effectiveness depends heavily on the raid encounter. And the fact is, when Holy Paladins heal most effectively when the raid clusters together, I hate to say this, but that also inherently means that they heal least effectively when the raid spreads out. So if you construct Holy with this be near the targets mentality, they'll only be optimal if they're in a raid encounter where the raid can cluster. If they can't cluster, Holy will suck, and you probably hate the words overpowered and underpowered, but the reality is there's also the ever-present danger that Holy will be overpowered in fights where the raid clusters, and or underpowered in fights where they can't. With that in mind, you should seriously consider a course correction with the mastery that you announced for Legion. Imagine how useful a Holy Paladin would be in a fight like like Iron Reaver. This is a fight with very little clustering, a lot of moving around, and a lot of raid damage. Now I will say this, it absolutely helps that we'd have a heal that we can cast while moving. Light of the Martyr looks to me like it's a terrific concept, and it'll be useful with the current design and probably a lot more designs than just the current one. But there's a problem. With a setup where we need to be close to the targets we heal, and with a battlefield as huge as this one, an ability that lets us move faster is a must-have. But the only move faster ability ability that we can get our hands on is a talent. My understanding of the talent grid system that Ghostcrawler invented is that ideally talents will be always optional, never optimal. If a movement talent is a must-have, and it will be in all too many fights, it doesn't meet that optional, not optimal description. Honestly, we need a tool in our kits that gets us where we need to be, and while Light of the Martyr helps in that regard, it's not enough. As far as tools go, we need a multi-target healing tool in our kits for us to be up to scratch. Really, we do. I mean, if you look at the other healing specs, every single one of them, without exception, has a multi-target heal that doesn't have a cooldown. What terrifies me is that you have fallen into the trap of thinking that Beacon of Light counts as a multi-target healing tool, when really there's no comparison. Stuff like Healing Rain and Prayer of Healing are tools where the purpose is to help get the raid healed up when there's raid damage, and Beacon of Light doesn't serve that function at all. It serves the function of making sure the tank gets heals even when your attention is elsewhere. It could also serve the purpose of keeping yourself alive with sacrifice-style builds, and I really like that flexibility. Kudos to you guys for that, but I'm getting off subject here. Now, getting heals to the tank even when your attention is elsewhere is a good function, but you can't make the assumption that it fills in the same gap that Healing Rain or Prayer of Healing fill. Honestly, we need another multi-target healing ability that doesn't have a cooldown to fill that gap in. There are plenty of solutions here. A version of Holy Radiance that's a short-range AoE heal, adding a healing component to Consecration. Thank you so much for bringing back Consecration. But whatever you do, please do something, because Light of Dawn isn't enough to fill in that gap. Now, there are plenty of buffs that Light of Dawn is getting through our artifact and through talents, but looking at them makes me wonder if you're kind of missing the point about what group heals are for. They're for getting the raid up to a generally acceptable level of HP when they take heavy damage, but if you use them at any other time, you're wasting mana. Generally, you cast group heals when the raid needs them. But the talents I see involve a lot of random numbers. Divine Purpose gives you an extra Light of Dawn at random, and so does Break of Dawn, albeit working slightly differently. There's kind of redundancy there, but that's not what worries me. While I understand that random numbers generally up the effectiveness of abilities on average, and that pleasant surprises can make the game more interesting, the thing about group heals is that we need them to be effective when the raid has low HP. We don't need them to be effective at random or on average. If an extra heal pops out while the raid has low HP, sure, that's nice. But they can also pop up when we don't need them, or by the same token they can fail to show up at the very moment when they're needed most sorely. It would do more to help and be less frustrating if these talents did more to make group healing available when the raid needs it. If, for instance, Break of Dawn lowered Light of Dawn's cooldown by 1 second for every 10% health missing for every ally within 10 yards. You're probably balking at that idea. If there's enough injury or enough injured allies nearby, then Light of Dawn would have no cooldown. To which I say, yes, it would. That's kind of what you're looking for in an ability to heal the raid when the raid needs healing and lots of it. And it's the one thing that the current Holy Kit doesn't give us regardless of talents. And of course, if we did have a talent to give us a group heal with no cooldown, you know I'd be complaining that it's optimal, not optional, so please don't do that. I think that also covers my counter-argument about why group heals we get through talents aren't enough either. I mean, remember when Cataclysm was first coming out? It was like Christmas morning for Holy Paladins. We got 4 new healing abilities. It was like making up for lost time. But I digress. Your goal for healing in that expansion was that any healer could fulfill any role. In Wrath of the Lich King, Holy Paladins were extremely niche with tank healing, to the point where you guys tuned bosses' damage around what Holy Paladins were capable of. Healing classes in general were very niche in Wrath, but it meant that raid leaders had to take the class, not the player, and you figured, quite rightly, that the reverse would be more fun. Problem there for Holy Paladins. They couldn't group heal if they didn't have group heals. This is the same story. If you want us to do a job, give us enough tools in our kits to do it. You're probably thinking that I'm worse than a consultant right now. I know the feeling. I'm a programmer myself, and I've dealt with consultants before. But, well, the things I'm seeing you guys doing with Holy Paladins are very concerning, and I felt like I had to bring them up. Now, I can't just focus on the negative here, and not just because it'll make watching this video a drag for Blizzard employees either. As far as feedback goes, it's just as important to know what you guys did right as it is for you to know what you did wrong. You've definitely done some important things right with Legion. First of all, one of the big problems with Holy's kit and Warlords was that all our heals felt the same. Apart from Holy Shock, they were all timed cast heals with roughly the same cast time, and they only differed in who it was most efficient to cast them on and when. By making Light of Dawn instant and by changing Word of Glory out for Light of the Martyr, saw what you did there with giving it the old Holy Power icon, you have done a lot to fix that homogenization of our kits. Secondly, Holy Radiance had some serious problems in Warlords. It wasn't mana efficient or strong enough, and lowering the mana cost would have just turned us into Holy Radiance spam bots. Taking it out made sense, though I have to say it also left us without a non-cooldown group heal, but I've already covered that. Third, the Beacon of Faith talent basically had no competition in Warlords. I tried Beacon of Insight, but without something that'll help me keep track of who has that beacon, I couldn't really make use of it. The Beacon of the Lightbringer talent looks like it'll be competition, though that's an odd thing for me to say since I've recommended taking out that mastery. Fourth, the emphasis on class identity is going to do a lot for the game. One of the things I was craving for World of Warcraft was doing more to show how the individual classes help make the world of Azeroth what it is. I absolutely love world building like that. That's one of the reasons why I'm a brony, and I'm hoping that Legion does more to show what the classes really are and what their place is in Azeroth. Fifth, the visual updates. As much as I and the rest of the player base cling to stuff like what abilities we have in our kits and what numbers are attached to them, the fact is the cosmetic issue is important too. World of Warcraft is, at its core, a video game, and the video part of that means it's visual. This isn't a text-based game after all, and the fact is, when I saw how awesome some abilities in Diablo 3 looked, I got jealous. So I am so glad that you are revamping how our abilities look. That pretty much wraps up this open letter. If you guys are listening to this, then thank you very much for your time and for your consideration.